Hello and welcome to the Explain It podcast. I am your host, Ingryd Hernandez. As you will see today, it's just me. Stephen is helping our business by him checking out our property out in Flagstaff. It's an income producing property. It's looking so gorgeous. Beautiful finishes. So if you know anybody looking in Flagstaff, we have a great income generating property out there. Single family home. We converted a 2-bedroom, 1-bath to a 3-bedroom, 3-bath. Added some major square footage, and it has an ADU. So we're separating out the backyards, and it's going to be so amazing. So reach out to one of us if you have something, or if you have someone who would love an income generating property. But today is an amazing day. We have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, and my husband's future mentor in lending, Jeremy Demers. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the Explain It podcast.
Hi, I am not Stephen.
This is very true. Yes, you are not Stephen.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to discuss all things real estate. I'm jazzed up, ready to go.
Same. I've obviously have known you for a bit now, having been in sub 2 with you, kind of seeing how you operate. Still regret not buying a property out in Michigan with you.
Yep.
Almost,
yep.
right?
Courtney reminds me of that one frequently. So she regrets us not buying that somehow either, or as well, I should say. So yeah, Gun Lake comes up quite a bit in our household. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's human nature. I mean, it was like a $20,000 entry fee to this property. That was a custom made home. And I do recall though, just progressing in our friendship, even through that deal, because you guys walked it. In this space, you have to be very careful with who do you trust with potential deals, especially if you don't have stuff contracted. And I can say that without a doubt, you're a stand-up guy and somebody I can't wait to do a deal with. So I'm excited that, again, Mark's now in that lending space and you're essentially going to be mentoring him. So that's cool. Mark being my husband, for those of all of you don't know, I talk about his butt really, pretty often. So
oh,
I'm just kidding. He's very squeezable. He's cute. I can't help myself. So
I'll roll with that. That's fine. I'll throw my chips in about Mark as well. Yeah, no, I'm excited for that. That's going to be fun. Couldn't agree with you more. I feel like the longer that you're in the real estate investment business, the more stories you have and the more you learn about how to handle not just yourself with others, but how you handle other personalities and, how you structure deals. And, to your point, it's important to account for all those things and be cautious, because you only have to get burned once or twice, really once. You only have to get burned once doing something like that. And then you get your guard up for the rest of your career. So it's always nice to meet people and know them for years. And we haven't even done a significant type of deal yet, but I feel like we're on the precipice. I don't know. I feel like we're really close.
Yeah.
Especially for the last minutes.
You're a lender to one of my buyers at the moment. So I feel like that's really a done deal. And then just other ways that you have supported my business is when we have sellers who are trying to sell their property sub 2 and they're looking to buy in the next, 12 months or so, and really preparing what that future looks like. I think it's important for us to understand sellers' situation, what they want to eventually do in the future, and how we can make sure that we're not setting them up for failure. So I'm really happy that you're somebody that I can count on for that work too.
Yeah, likewise. Right back at you.
Yeah. So you and I did an episode in sub 2, and I say episode, but like a Zoom, where we recorded it. And I still I came up with this name, so I'm going to keep it, which is Don't Be a Lending Loser. And we've talked about putting a series together, a series of how can people prepare to help themselves through the lending process. And therefore, we're having this episode now about similar topic where, I've had DSCR loans. I'm bankable. My credit score stayed good, but it's still such an excruciating process to get a loan. But I do feel that you can help yourself. And I think now I'm becoming more of a professional borrower. And maybe we can go through some of those ways that you can help yourself. You can help a lender. If somebody wants you to, if you want to review a deal with someone like myself or Jeremy, what are some of the things that you should come to the table with so that we can tell you whether or not it's a good deal or no deal, and whether it's lendable. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think more than anything, investors for the most part are pretty responsive.
Mm-hmm.
Some are organized, some are not, but that's typical of any borrower, whether they're an investor or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think having even just a refresh or an updated, bullet list as a borrower on the things that you need to have, but also maintain, so that every time you go through the process, you're not having to start from scratch and, where's that folder again with all the stuff from the last thing. I think that's powerful because time is super valuable in the lending space. If you're a borrower, you know how much time has worked against you, just like people have experiences where time has worked in your favor. But to that end, it's easier, not just on the borrower, it's easier on the loan officer, it's easier on the process. It could save you processing fees and other dollars that you might pay at closing just because of how prepared you are. So I agree 100%. Having a refresh maybe once a quarter or a couple times a year, maybe, on what's needed, why it's needed, and also understanding different DSCR lenders want different things. They might offer something that's really attractive on one end in terms of a loan feature or variable or an exception, but they might also have a negative on the other end. So then you have to kind of balance out what you're getting approved for, and that requires a solid set of documents. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'm curious out there, who of you have had who has actually gone through the process of getting a loan? It could be personal or, more through investor ways of buying. And let us know, yes or no. And then what was your experience when, give us a little bit of feedback on how that experience went for you. In the meantime, let's tell the people what are some of the fundamentals that they should be prepared, whether or not it's an investor type of loan or if it's I don't know, what do you call it? A traditional purchase, homestead purchase?
Conforming, if you want to be geeky about it, conforming loans like conventional loans, FHA loans, VA loans, all the typical borrower loans, where if you're not an investor and you've purchased a home, if you're a veteran, obviously you'll use VA. There's some good benefits there. Otherwise, conforming is a good way to put it. Or sometimes with investors, I'll call them vanilla loans or the regular conventional set of loans. There's so many synonyms in this space, it's ridiculous. And then the other side is the investment side, which is non-qualified mortgage or non-QM. People hear non-QM, that's kind of what that means. They don't really fall into the bucket of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac type of loans that are sold on Wall Street in traditional mortgage-backed securities. So because of that, non-QM mortgages generally are bundled and sold to investors. And they have different requirements, which is why we're able to do some really creative things on that end. So,
okay. And then you said the phrase DSCR. What does DSCR stand for?
DSCR stands for debt service coverage ratio. And all that simply means is your debt service is whatever your monthly obligations are. So if you take your mortgage payment, take your insurance and your taxes, HOA, or CDD, if you're in states like Florida, whatever your monthly expenses are that are tied to that property per month, the ratio is derived from that figure, which you owe every month, versus what can that property produce in the form of income every month. That's it. And the ratio is simply one divided by the other. And if you are at a 1.00 ratio, it means if you have $4,000 in expenses every month and the property is expected to bring in $4,000 a month, that's 1.0. a lot of lenders approve. That's really what they look for underwriting on one end of the spectrum. And there's 4 categories there, and I can dive into those. But in terms of the actual collateral, yes, that is the green light, red light. If it's lower than 1.0 on the ratio, there are lenders that do those. They're fewer and they're more expensive, those loans, but there are lenders that do it if you have a negative cash flow. So your ratio is less than 1.
Yeah. What was tough for me learning that is that I had a property that was a more unique property. And I feel like as investors, as we start to try to figure out all the ways that we can add value and maximize our rents, that lenders need to, this is not your fault, but some lenders need to kind of create more flexibility in their lending products as we prove out some of these models, right? So co-living being so popular nowadays, that's a rent by room model. And those really maximize what rental income a property can bring in. I had a property down in Tucson where it was a fix and keep, but not because we wanted to, but because we had to. The market kind of shifted on us and everybody else who was flipping back in 2022. And unfortunately, we had to do a cash in refi. But one of the things that was really tough to get through was the DSCR ratio. This was a Haver house. If you guys know, Ralph Haver was a famous architect here in Arizona. Beautiful, beautiful home that we have down in Tucson. And now it's being used as a group home rental. So as people transition out of prison, they need a place to stay, stay out of trouble, get out of the riffraff experience they've had. So it's doing a lot of good for the community. But it also does a lot of good for me as an investor because it has a more premium rent. So they are renting that property out at $4,500, which more than covers the DSCR ratio. But at the time, it was really, really difficult, despite the fact we already had the renter in there renting this way. They wouldn't give us that rental coverage. Could maybe you give us a little bit of like that perspective and a challenge that may continue until we kind of, I don't know, change our lending practices from a group home or pad split, co-living perspective?
Yeah. The DSCR model, right? It's not new. It's been around for a long time, decades and decades. Don't know exactly when. I wish I were a better DSCR historian. Maybe I should be. But it basically started because, people that were lending for businesses, they just wanted to make sure the business was making enough to cover what the debt every month would be, right? Same concept. And eventually it's brought itself into the residential space with multifamily and apartments and those sorts of things. And then eventually it trickled into the single family space. And that's kind of where we are now. But things change. Lending changes over time. So, I'll give you a good example for co-living. I also have a property that I would consider co-living. Luckily, it's seller financed. I've not had to look at DSCR options quite yet, although I'm getting close. But these are the factors that I have to consider. And I'm the user. I'm the mortgage guy, and I'm the guy that's needing the mortgage. So I have to review these options frequently, and lending does change over time. There was a time a year and a half, 2 years ago, I couldn't do much with a short-term rental. Actually, I should say earlier part of kind of COVID, like 2020, 2021, it was much more difficult for short-term rentals, at least with the options I had at that time. And now, I'm closing a transaction for an individual in sub 2 as the seller on a property that he used as a co-living property. And we found a short-term rental underwrite at a specific lender that was able to take short-term rental income from AirDNA. They used AirDNA's snapshot of what the yearly income would be. And if it has a certain market score, it's a green light, red light. It's like it's approved or it's not approved. And this one was approved. So that loan alone would not have been possible, at least not with the resources I have a few years back. And now we can do those sorts of loans. So to your point, with co-living, everyone, especially in the industry, everyone knows that we are short on housing. We're short on rooms, we're short on housing. That, I mean, if you look at the data behind what's being built versus what's being filled, and all the millennials firmly implanted in their buying years with only more to come, there's not enough homes, even if they built what they said they're going to build, and rarely do they hit that number every year. So there's going to have to be lending loosening for, to make allowances for those sorts of uses. And I think we're getting close to the point where they're going to start extending some of these more creative type loan products with exceptions made for the type of use. But, I'll tell a conversation I had just last week. They look at, there's one lender that looks at co-living as border income. That's another way that they view that. So if people are calling their mortgage folks and they're like, co-living, when you say border income, that's essentially what that is. And the lender I spoke with last week says outright, no, they're not doing anything with that.
Border income?
Border income, correct.
Oh, like a boarding house.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yep. Exactly. So, and different lenders might call this a different use, but when I described what we were looking for, they said, oh, border income. Yeah, we can't do that. Okay, not a problem. The other thing you can, and we can dive into this and I can go on and on. So stop me with questions, but this goes back to not being a lending loser. So if you have, the way I look at underwriters as a lender and as a borrower is, you're going in front of a judge. Like you're in a courtroom, you're in front of a judge. The underwriter's the judge. Doesn't matter who they assigned you. It doesn't matter if they had a good day or a bad day. They're your underwriter. So the more support, documentation, proof, resources, receipts, everything you can imagine, the more evidence to support your case for why you are a good borrower and why the property is a good piece of collateral to loan on, the better off you'll be. And then from there, it's about getting creative with your mortgage guy or gal and figuring out the best solution.
Okay. Yeah. Right on. Well, and I do feel like if you have your lending partner like Jeremy up front, then you guys can strategize before you overcommit into something that you can't get out of. One example I was given, I'm not sure how ethical this is, but I would like to bring it up, is that so like if you are looking to do co-living and a lot of folks aren't doing boarding, for example, one of the ways around that is really making sure that your average rents make sense for the loan you're going to get so that you're covered on the ratio side. But also like the co-living aspect, like the design aspect should be that easy to bring up or put down. So for example, if you're going to do a 6 to 8 bedroom, normal, that's, I think, very typical room count, especially here in Arizona. I've seen people go up to 9 and 10, but I think the typical one I see is like 7, 8. That you're getting that property looked at or revised while you're at like room 5, 6, so that you're, what's that called? You're conforming. You're not like you're not a weird unicorn against other properties in the neighborhood. Is that the right term?
Yeah. You're again, so many synonyms in this business, but conforming, does it conform to the area with aesthetic and finish and those sorts of things. Yeah. So like you're talking like on an appraisal or what the lender might view that. Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. Yeah.
So a strategy I've never done, is get your loan product in place, make sure that your rent is covered by your existing rooms that are approved, and then add on your additional rooms after you've stabilized. So that way you don't have any issues from an appraisal standpoint. You don't have any issues from your lending, and you're still maximizing your value. I don't see that any different as somebody adding an ADU after you bought a property, right? Which is like you're improving or doing more to the property after you've purchased it. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, I like that. I know with the ADUs, you get the, permitting, running sewer, electric, and all those kind of, like, it just gets so complex. So I can see why people are trying to maximize the amount of rooms they can get from the existing footprints right? To your point about the 8, 9 bedrooms or more than that, it's a little, depending on the home, depending on where you're at, a little bit wonky, a little weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I would enjoy more than to have more 5, 10, 15-minute conversations with investor buyers that are looking for properties like this, that want something in place before they go out and make offers, put up earnest money, get through inspection periods and all that. So that you highlighted that well. Doing some due diligence beforehand, and talking to the right lender to make sure that what you're expecting to get is what you're actually going to end up with is big. Because a lot of times I'll get, oh, hey, I got rejected from 13 other lenders. Somebody said you could help. And I'm like, well, I mean, and I might have to reject that as well, because sometimes it's just they're involved with a deal that doesn't work for one reason or another, whether it's them as a borrower or whether it's the collateral, the property itself, or the use. So having those conversations ahead of time, huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maureen, I might have one for you in Scottsdale. I believe that's where you like co-living, and I have a couple of leads out there. Would love to talk to you about them, and then we can talk to Jeremy about financing them. So, and if you're somebody out there who really need somebody like Jeremy to kind of strategize on what kind of lending products are available. Jeremy does lending across all 50 states. That's why my husband teamed up with him, and again, learning from the best, in my opinion. And because there's so much latitude there, right? Just tooting your horn a little there, Detroit. Yeah.
Thank you. It needs tooting. Well, 49 states, by the way. I don't want to mislead anyone. New York State, my brokerage is currently working on New York State. Apparently, it's a very difficult state to get licensed in, but 49 states we can do.
All right, 49 out of 50, not bad.
Not bad.
But yes, but that's one reason why, I think we teamed up with you. And I say we because it's my husband, we're married. But I think it's important to have the kind of flexibility to go across the nation, simply because with our mentorships that we're involved in and all the activities, I wouldn't want to be stopped to just one or two states. I think it's important to have that kind of reach out there. So if you guys want to get a hold of Jeremy, fundmenationwide.com. It's just a Google form, get some very high level information, and then we'll get a schedule out there for you guys to talk to Jeremy, or maybe even Mark. You may even be able to talk to my husband. We'll see if he gets the guts to do it.
You will.
Yeah, he's just getting started, guys. We all suck when we just get started on anything we do. So anyway, right on. Okay, so that's one huge tip as a professional borrower. If you're going to try to want to buy rentals, you have to know what your DSCR is. So what are your average rents for your rental strategy? So if it's your typical long-term rent, you got to know that number. If it's short-term rent, you got to know that number. If it's co-living, and I do know there's some very specific lenders who will do co-living. The only thing that they require, and again, you might know better than me, is that it has to be ran by pad split. And I feel like that's because that model has now kind of proved out and kind of takes some of the risk away from that model. Albeit, if you go back to the 1500s or so, rent by room models have lived on forever and ever. So that's interesting to see that it's such a speculative thing. But I think it's more to do with the typical CC&R. So like what's the stand for?
Covenants, conditions, restrictions. Yeah.
Okay. So what he said.
I don't know. It's been a while since I took my real estate continuing education. So yeah, conditions, covenants, restrictions, and
yeah, I think that's it. CC and R's. Yeah. I'm going to go with that. But a lot of them, whether you know it or not, whether you're living in an HOA or not, you can only have up to 3 people unrelated in your house. So with so many, in order for that property to be known as a single family home or single family residence, because it could be a manufactured home as well, that is why it's so hard to mitigate this type of loan, because of the actual restrictions that most single family homes carry. So hi, Deborah. Deborah is reaching us from Cali. I'm going to assume that means California, and that's Cali, Colombia, where I was born. So Anywho.
Okay. Really, I'm learning so much about you today. That's amazing. Cali,
Oh,
Columbia.
yes. Yeah, right on. Okay. So that is your professional borrower tip. Know your rents for your exit strategy. All right. One other thing that I feel, and you and I kind of did this little class, and we can just stay really high level, but how do you get yourself organized? So what are some of the typical things that lenders are going to ask for? So that way, none of you guys are surprised when you get it. So if you've been on this podcast before, I always tell all of you, stay bankable. And part of that is take care of your credit. So I know we're not going to be able to solve for credit here, but what are some of the things that are going to be like on repeat every time you go for a loan? And so, what should people organize themselves against?
Yeah, and I'll stay as high level as I can. If I get too deep in the weeds, break out the weed whacker and get me out.
Right on.
So yeah, I even pulled up the most recent DSCR file that I've done. I pulled it up on the side here just to reference it because this was a good example of a borrower that had 98% of what was needed, but there were still a couple of things left over and everything went fairly smooth. If there's 4 categories, I'll shout out first. You have cash, you have collateral, you have credit. So cash would be the money you're bringing down. Whatever your down payment plus your closing costs would be, that's your cash category. So you want to have documentation, bank statements, usually 2 months, the last 2 full months of bank statements showing your cash that you're going to bring to the table at closing. That's one of the 4 categories. The second of the 4 is collateral. We kind of spoke on that, but the property itself, does it cash flow? Yes, no. How can we get it to cash flow? What exceptions can we make? There's a whole rabbit hole with that, but that's the second one. The third one is credit, which you mentioned. Got to have a credit score. And there's a lot of nuance with this.
What kind of credit score would somebody need to minimally have to get a loan?
Yeah. So anything, pretty much as high as you can go, 800, whatever, all the way down to about 680 is going to open up, like the Cheesecake Factory menu of what your options are, which is you have plenty of options. Okay. Just cheesecake is like a whole page and a half or something. Cheesecake sounds good. Anyway, so you have all
all right.
I haven't had lunch yet either. So this is going to be, we keep talking about food. This is going to be good.
Oh, Mark cooked me up some buttered sirloin. So if you guys haven't had buttered sirloin.
What? I need to come to I regret it. I regret doing this virtually. I'm coming to the office. So you have, 680 and up is good. Lower than 680. And listen, some people say, I just can't do it, or 660, you can't do anything lower. You can get loans done, DSCR loans down into the 580 to 600 range, but there's so many things that you give up with that low of a score. You're going to give up your LTV. You're going to give up how much the lender is going to give you, right? Which could mean instead of 20% down, you might be 25, 30% down or even more because of that score, right?
Yeah.
Or they're going to say, hey, we'll do it at 592 FICO, but you're going to need to bring an extra 10% down. You're going to need to show 12 months of reserves instead of, 3 months or 6 months, which is more typical. In some cases, 0 months, depending on how you're set up. You just have to jump through all these other hoops that make the loan really not realistic. So you're exactly right. If you're below, I would say below 640 to 660, it gets a little tougher with options. And again, every lender's different. We have 157 of them as of this morning. I don't know if we added any since 9 a.m., but they're all a little different, right? Which is, it's not easy to pinpoint a number other than to say below 680, the options get fewer.
Yeah. Okay. So we have cash, collateral, credit, and then what's the fourth one?
Borrower. And this ties into the last point I'll make about credit ties into borrower. Knowing how your corporate structure is set up from a loan officer's perspective, from a mortgage guy's perspective, is important. It's huge because there's a lot of things that can come into play once I understand how your corporate structure is set up and who's in your companies, who's in your LLC. Are you creating a new LLC for this purchase? If so, who else is going to be in there? Can everyone have their credit run that's in that LLC? Or do you need to designate one person to use their credit while the others are still in the LLC, but they don't have to have their credit run? There's a lot of these sorts of nuances that can change. And there are options a lot of the times for the borrowers in the credit. So I mentioned that for credit because sometimes people think, oh, I have a 660, I have a guy 654, and I can't get him on a traditional DSCR. Well, we're going to add his business partner in who's got a 760. They're going to do a refinance on a property that was formerly his primary home and now is an investment. They're going to flip it, remodel it, sell it on market. And they were initially he was going to sell it to his partner. I said, guys, that purchase transaction is going to have so many more costs and there's a loan involved. Why don't you just refinance it, save on all the purchase costs? You'll have a lot lower of a rate, a lot lower of a closing cost number. And that's what we're doing with that one here in Scottsdale. But for the borrower category, some of it I mentioned, who's in the LLC? Are you closing in the LLC? Do you want to close in your own name? You could do that with DSCR. You can do that. A lot of people will prefer their LLC. That's a plus. And this ties into the documentation to prepare. So, if you have Ingryd's LLC, and let's say that's your holding company because you set up your corporate structure the right way. But then you have Ingryd's Main Street LLC, which is the property purchasing LLC. So now from my perspective, not only do I need articles of incorporation, operating agreement, an EIN letter, and a letter of good standing in a lot of cases, but I need all those documents for both your holding company and for your property LLC.
Okay, let's go through that one more time. So your entity docs, right? So I'm going to write this as a tip for everybody. So for all of you listening, if you want to organize yourself or if you want to become a professional borrower, and this is literally what me and Jeremy covered during a sub 2 Zoom. So you guys are getting some gems here that most people have had to pay for, but you want your articles of organization, you want your EIN letter, you want a letter of good standing, and then you want your operating agreement, right? Correct. Anything else on that?
Those four are the most common. And I'll be honest with you, the operating agreement is the document that most investors do not have. Articles are easy. You get those when you form it. They email them to you. You have EIN letter. You got to open an account, so you need the EIN. So most investors have that. Letter of good standing varies state by state. Sometimes I can even take a screenshot of a corporation commission website for certain states that shows in good standing as of that date, and that'll be accepted. Sometimes you have to actually pay $20 and get a formal letter from the corporation commission. It just depends on the state. But you're right about the letter of good standing. They just want to make sure it's active, that it's not an inactive LLC, and that there's nothing legal happening against your LLC, right? No pending litigation or anything like that. So
yeah, literally, I had to pull these documents for my LLCs. It was an LLC. I was doing some business in Texas, and I had lapse. I didn't realize there was something I was supposed to do, and I didn't realize it. For the state of Texas, they were expecting a refresh, and there was nothing really for that LLC, but going through the process of getting the locks or the LLC docs together, I was like, oh, I didn't realize it. And so I would encourage all of you, if you want to be a professional borrower, whether it's you or a VA, that you're pulling you're making sure that these docs are up to date at least once a quarter. So 4 times a year, you're making sure that these docs are all up to date. Because if you go to borrow, you want to make sure you're not doing it like I did and accidentally lapse. And it was really just paying like a small fee to my registered agent to refresh some of the documents we needed to submit. Like, it was super easy. Yeah. So
yeah, it's a great point. New Mexico requires yearly renewal, so you have to manually go in there or have your statutory agent sort of go through that process. Yes, we're still in business. Yes, we're fine, blah, blah, blah. Pay your, $15 or whatever. Michigan, same thing. Michigan, you have to attest every year and do a yearly statement for your LLC. Arizona, we're perpetual, baby. We just go on and on and on. You don't have to do anything. You actually have to take action to dissolve it. Otherwise, it just goes on forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing how your state handles LLC, your corporation commission handles your LLCs is good to know. So you can account for that and make sure your statutory agent or your bookkeeper, CPA, executive assistant, all the roles I need to hire for, because I have none of those. I'm all those and then some.
Well,
So,
and one other thing that I was going to mention is that taking care of these, that's just good housekeeping. But what I did learn, so here's the con of a perpetual LLC, that once you have done your taxes on that LLC, so now you've actually put some sort of gain or loss against that LLC, you are expected to continue to file your taxes against that LLC perpetually until you dissolve it. So even if you didn't gain $1 in whatever year you're doing that LLC in, the state of Arizona will charge you $500 for not filing, and the feds will also charge you. Ask me how I know that. So you definitely need to stay up, especially once you have LLCs and you've actually filed your taxes against them. If you are no longer using them and you no longer plan to use them, you might as well dissolve it. That's my perspective.
Yeah, that's good advice. Managing the LLCs is, I think, an overlooked part of investing, really, whether it's how your taxes are done or whether looking for letters of good standing and making sure that you don't need to file an annual report, those sorts of things, those fall by the wayside. And I think we can both look at each other, Ingrid, and agree that we've both let those things fall by the wayside. So we're speaking as people that are probably a little bit more hypervigilant on administrative things like that, and yet it still fell by the wayside. So yeah, totally. Every quarter, great idea. Once, even twice a year, just make sure everything's on the up and up, and then everything's recorded the right way. And if you dissolve a relationship with another member of your LLC, or if another member, I forget what the form is, it's different depending on the state, but if somebody buys out somebody else, keep that documentation. That will also be a part of your submission, because your articles, unless your amendments resort, and show information from the original articles filed, you're going to need to show that the ownership is different, because the other individual that you bought out might be required to sign depending on your loan type and what the requirements are. So yeah, having all these localized in one place. I review them twice a year. We have them in certain folders for certain properties, and obviously tax time comes up, we scrub those again. And yeah, it's just good practice, good business ownership practice for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So funny, because the same feedback has come also with asset management, right? Like, I was always like, why would you need an asset manager? It doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, oh, now it makes sense to me. Like, I've had a couple of properties, especially when tax time comes around, where they've adjusted taxes and your escrow is different. But here you are, if you bought a property subject to, for example, you will not, and I repeat this, you will not be paying the same PITI for more than a year or two. It will change. And when it changes, you have to have somebody's eyeballs reviewing that mortgage statement and submitting that mortgage statement update to your servicing company if you're using one. And literally, I hadn't had this property more than 3 months, and my mortgage changed by like $50-something. And so I was already shorting the payments. I'm like, what the heck? So anyway, just some feedback there. You need a manager of your entity docs and a manager of all your assets for your mortgages and such. So anywho.
The lessons you learn from others' mistakes. So valuable.
Yeah, definitely learn from mine. So, okay. So those have been really great tips of becoming a professional borrower. What else do you commonly see out there, Jeremy, when people are asking you for some moolah and they don't have their shit together? Like, what are some of the things they've got to be prepared with and to truly call themselves a more professional borrower? And if you guys are out there and have some questions about lending, please go ahead and put your questions on the side chat. Thank you, Trisha, for the feedback. I love Trisha. And let us know what questions you guys have.
Yeah, I think, those 4 categories will take up 90-95% of usually what's required on these things, but there's a few there. I like the fact there's always these little exceptions. So, I just recently had a borrower that is refinancing an investment property to pull cash out to put down on an investment property purchase that I was helping him with. Sometimes, investors may think that lenders don't like communicating with each other if there are 2 lenders working on a file for the same borrower on different properties. But I would highly encourage you to introduce your mortgage advisor to anyone else you're working with, whether that's your agent or whether that's another mortgage broker in this case. Because there was a delay on the refinance, which delayed my transaction because we needed to source his down payment funds. So not only did his refinance need to fund, where he got his check or his wire at closing of whatever amount of money it was, but then I need the note and I need the settlement statement. I need the wire form from that title company because they wired it to our title company. So, those things take a few days. And had I had a little bit better communication with his other lender as to what the status was, and I know the lender that did it, and they were doing, the best that they could to get it closed. It was nothing that they were doing wrong. Just sometimes there's delays. HOA docs, condo docs, for example. That tends to drag some things on. Insurance quotes with really weird condo complexes. That was the other problem that dragged it on a bit. So making sure, I guess the overall point would be making sure all of the professionals that you're dealing with on a transaction are communicating or have the ability to communicate with each other. I like to think I probably over communicate. I try to be super responsive, but if everyone knows what's going on at all times and there's a day or 2 worth of a delay, it's a non-issue. Everyone's understanding, everyone gets it. They understand things come up. That's just this is the loan process that we live in 2025. Loans are harder now to do today than they were 5 years ago, and those were harder than 5 years prior. More documents. I mean, your closing packets now are how many pages? 140 some pages on just a regular straight vanilla purchase. So linking up your professionals is a good idea. And I think the other thing I'll go back to is just the more communication you have with your mortgage advisor prior to making offers or prior to starting a refinance transaction, the more they understand your business. Don't hold your cards back. Share how your business works. I oftentimes can put myself in people's shoes because I have purchased subject to, as you have. We have done seller finance deals. We have fix and flip. We have wholesaled. We have DSCR loans. I can speak to all those things as a user. What do they call like the hair club for men, right? I'm the owner and I'm the client, right? So that's helpful. Like that's helpful because I'm looking at everything through the lens of how do I get this done if this were me? Right. And I can put that template onto the borrower. So having upfront conversations beforehand is critical.
Trisha has a really good question. And then I have another one coming from Instagram from Jessica Lawn Realtor. But Trish's question is, what's the typical time frame that we should anticipate? And I feel like this is going to come with a lawyer answer of depends. But what do you think?
Well, Ingryd, it depends. No, that's fair. So I know why people ask that. It's one of the first questions they ask. I get it. Sometimes your deals need to close really quick. This is the investor in us. Everything needs to happen quickly. If I have all documentation up front ahead of time, and we can order the appraisal on day 1, and I'm familiar with the lender we're using because your loan is a type of loan I've done before with the exceptions and all the little nuances that it has, I can say 2.5 weeks would be the most comfortable, shortest time frame I would give, assuming all those things are true. Rarely are they true, mainly because people want the inspection period to occur before they put out money for an appraisal. That's understandable. I do the same thing. But you have to add 7 to 10 days for that on the appraisal. That's why I like to order it day 1. If you know it's a done deal and you don't care what the condition is and you just want to get to closing, we order that thing on day 1 if it's needed. And that helps a lot. The appraisal alone, because it's a 7 to 10 day process right now, because it's not incredibly busy. Most AMCs can do 7 days.
Uh-huh.
Is going to be the one component of the loan process that takes the longest amount of time. So the earlier you start that clock, the better. Everything else is a matter of submitting documents, getting them approved. What do we have left for conditions? Submitting a second set, getting everything cleared, and then closing. So as far as disclosures and the timeframes up front and toward the end, sometimes you're at the mercy of the lender you select, depending on your criteria for your loan. Some lenders, there's one in particular, that takes 3 days from the time you issue a clear to close. So no more work is needed here. We're all good. We're preparing your loan documents to send a title for signing. Great. How long does that take? 3 days, 3 business days. It's a long time. Other lenders might be within 24 hours or the same day from clear to close to getting the file balanced and getting documents out. So that comes back to what are the other characteristics of your loan, and can I put it with somebody that's that quick, or do we need the lender that underwrites on short-term rental income, that grants a lot of exceptions, that's really good on pricing? You might wait that extra 3 or 4 days for closing because of that file. But yeah, it is a lawyer answer. Sorry, Trisha. Hope that was helpful.
I will say this, Trisha, and Jeremy has not been my lender in any of my DSCR loans. It's taken me no less than 45 days for each one, if that gives you some perspective. So I feel like with DSCR, even I would say this on the first DSCR as being my first investor loan, that one, a lot of it, I'll own up to it. Although the minute I would get a request for additional docs, I would send it off. I would argue within 30 minutes of that question being asked, hey, can you send me this? Boom, right away. Because that's how you can help yourself. So if you want to be a professional borrower, whether it's you or a virtual assistant, when those questions come and you don't want to be the cause for any of those delays, the minute a question comes, answer it ASAP. So definitely.
That's like the gold star statement, the congrats, the confetti, whatever the button is. That's the biggest takeaway, I think, is the more responsive you are as a borrower. Gosh, for as responsive as I know I am, it would be heaven to work with borrowers like that, because the second I need something, you're on it, or you're fetching it, or you know how to get it. You just got to get it over to me. That's music to my ears, and that will make a big difference. But that 2.5, I didn't even say on the other end. So a typical DSCR, you're right. It's going to be more like 30 to 40 days, which is a normal escrow for a normal residential retail transaction. Really, 30 to 40 days is about what you would expect. If you got 45 days, great. We're probably going to be twiddling our thumbs for the last 2 weeks. More than likely. You never know what happens. Yeah.
So here is something that I was really upset about when I was doing my first DSCR loan, and I'll probably still carry this to my grave. I had a loan rate quote at, I think, 5% when I started the loan. And I had actually verbally asked, okay, can we lock that? They wouldn't lock it. Is there some special conditions, especially when you're an investor, on locking your rates? I ended up with a 6% based on all the interest rate changes that ended up happening during the process of getting this loan.
I can't think of one.
My lender just sucked, because they're not regular listeners.
It's funny because I know enough to know that I don't know how every lender works. And I don't think that's a good or bad thing. It's just every lender has their own. I mean, the more loans I do, the more I learn. Every lender is not built the same, and every loan officer is really not built the same. There's a lot of great loan officers and mortgage advisors out there, but a mortgage advisor that's an investment advisor at the same time is valuable, and that's where I try to firmly plant myself. With the locking, I can't think. I'm just thinking back. I don't think that there's one instance where I could not lock right up front after the initial disclosure went out, for you to review all your numbers. This is the loan estimate. Everyone should get one. Doesn't matter if it's there are some lenders that don't, like fix and flip loans. A little bit more sort of investor focused loans may not have these, but you should definitely have a loan estimate within the first couple days of application. And that right there is going to show you the rate that is quoted. And if that's the rate that you like, and you have that conversation with your loan officer and you're like, yeah, let's lock it, there should be no reason they can't lock it. again, this is my experience, but there might be some lenders that say, well, we need to submit to underwriting to lock, or we need to do ABC before we can lock. That all might be true, but not with my lenders. If we want to lock on day one, like there's a loan I imported, matter of fact, for your client before we hopped on here, and he actually called me while we're on our call here. So I'll call him back when we're done and explain to him his loan estimate, because that went out just before we hopped on here. And my feedback to him is going to be, this rate looks pretty good. We're going to flush out how much concessions we have to work with and how we can apply those to his buy down. But I'm going to recommend he locks right away. I never like to get 2 or 3 weeks in. Rarely do I do this before we start looking at locking, because you're gambling in one way. Yes, it's going to cause angst and anxiety and stress for a lot of borrowers that really, really, really are focused on their cash flow, which means they need the rate to be a certain number. And it's extra files for me to think about day in and day out. Oh, should we lock? Should we lock? What's the market doing? What's the market doing? Sometimes it's not tenable for me to do that consistently. So I like to get it out of the way up front. If the numbers work, great, let's lock it in. If the market improves dramatically in 2 or 3 weeks, there may be some exceptions we can make where perhaps we can look at a different lender. That's not a great practice, by the way, should not do that. But in those instances where there's an exception, there's usually some concessions that can be made. And I've done that in the past a couple of times, but the market doesn't drastically change that much unless it gets worse. In my experience, it never gets better that quickly. It always gets worse that quickly. So I would rather lock toward the beginning of the file, or once we figure out the numbers and narrow down all the pennies and where they go, lock right away. And then just rest assured the rest of the transaction that you're not going to be exposed to any negative market moves. That's my feedback.
That's great. That's a great point. Okay, so Jessica Lawn Realtor. And by the way, I'll just cry myself to sleep for not being more stern with that guy and not just getting my shit done on when I asked him to. But anyway, Jessica Lawn Realtor on Instagram was asking, do you like to create new LLCs per property? So I'll answer this, but Jessica, myself, and Jeremy are not lawyers, so we're not giving you legal advice. But I don't. I think the only people who make money out of an LLC per property are the lawyers and corporations who are advising people to do that. So what I prefer to do, and what I have been recommended by mentors to do, is to do at least 10 properties, or at max 10 properties per LLC, and then put an umbrella insurance across them. That way you're mitigating your risk from an insurance standpoint, but you're also not having to create new LLCs every time. And I feel from like a borrowing standpoint, this might be some, maybe you can provide perspective, Jeremy. Like it's a little like, well, I guess my holding LLC would be like the qualifying LLC. But if you get a new LLC for the new property, there's no history with it. So it feels a little bit tougher to get through a loan. But what say you?
Yeah, I've done both. I'll create a new LLC for a property as we're in escrow. And a lot of times we can go ahead and invest and close in that LLC without an issue. But I've seen this happen, 2 routes. I like your route mainly because I just saw my tax return bill for 2024. And, you also pay for tax preparation for every LLC you have. So that's another, in addition to the corporations and lawyers that get the money for setting those things up, the registered agents and statutory agents, whatever, that's also a factor. But yeah, you can create a new LLC per property. I like the idea of having, and this was advice that I got from my CPA. And again, I'm not a CPA. My CPA is a CPA, but I'm not a CPA. So I could be making this up. So don't listen to me. But he also suggested if you form one LLC, and let's say I have properties in Michigan, I could create one LLC for all the Michigan properties up to maybe $1 million or a couple $1 million in value, do exactly what Ingryd stated, which is get an umbrella policy. So if something happens with one of those properties and there's an insurance claim, or there's something that happens with one of them, the other ones in that LLC are not going to be as negatively impacted as if you did not have that umbrella policy. I like that idea a lot and that strategy. But you can also close in your own personal name. There's things to consider with that, privacy, anonymity, all those things. But I've had instances where the lender would not accept LLC documents from me, and they were going back and forth with their legal department, and it was taking 3 days every time their legal department did a review. So after doing this 3 times, I said, you know what? I'm going to close in my name because I don't care. I want this deal done. And I was also, trying to make the seller happy as well. So I closed in my name, and then I just deeded it to my LLC right afterward. And because the loan was in my name and I was the only managing member of the LLC, the chances of a due on sale are even less than if you just did a normal subject to and did it the right way. So, and I still have that same loan with that same lender to this day, like 4 years later, 3 years later. So,
Wow, nice. I love that. Well, Jeremy, I know we're starting to round out the time out here on the podcast. Hopefully all of you out there were able to get a lot of value. And if you are looking for lending opportunities from Jeremy, one of the really cool things, or at least maybe if we can highlight, is you're not just your typical lender, right? Like, what are all the lending products that you have access to, especially, and you're considered a broker, is that right? And maybe if you can explain what a broker is versus like your typical lender.
Yeah, so you're right about that. I'm with a mortgage brokerage. Loan officers are loan officers, but when you hear people talk about being a broker, it means they have multiple different homes for your files. So we do have over 150 lenders, and not all lenders do all the same loan products. A lot of them overlap and some of them don't. It just means that I take your information one time. I don't have one menu of things to choose from. It's like going to Cheesecake Factory or going onto DoorDash, where you have everything available. It's kind of like that. So I take your information one time. I'll price everything out across the board with your criteria, because some lenders will not work if you're closing in an LLC with a corporate structure. Some lenders will work. Some lenders won't work with short-term rentals. Some lenders will. So I have to do all of those research points to make sure that I'm going to put your file with a lender that's going to close it quickly, and get you what you want in terms of the numbers. That's what a broker does. Regular retail lenders or mortgage lenders are also great. They might have a limited menu to choose from. This is why if you go into Chase and ask about mortgages, they're going to look at you cross-eyed when you say, DSCR or, gap funding or fix and flip loans or any of that stuff. They have one menu and it's a very small menu. So, and then as far as the products I have so many that I have to bring up a list. It's called my product list flyer because I'm that organized, and that's how I label my things. So anything, anything that's a normal vanilla type loan. And what I mean by that is conventional loans, purchase or refinance, and rate and term refinance or cash out refinance are fine. FHA, VA, USDA, which is also a government loan, but for rural properties, which could be a great option, especially for lower income or low down payment borrowers.
That's how my husband bought his house.
Yeah. HELOCs we can do fixed second liens also on DSCR, by the way.
Wait, pause for a moment. A fixed second lien DSCR loan.
Correct. As long as the rents cover the first and the second, you can get approved on this one.
Okay. What if I have a sub-2 house that has a ton of equity? Could I get that second loan fixed?
Negative. I'll tell you this, there may be hope on the horizon if you have subject to properties, because I know that there's a lot of private lending options, through different groups that we're involved in, right? And those are available. But as far as institutional options like fixed second DSCR that I just found, I feel like we're close to coming up with programs that will allow for fixed seconds and hopefully eventually HELOCs on properties where you own it, but the lien is in somebody else's name. That's really the trick. And I don't know when this is. I don't have a timeline. I don't have insider knowledge or anything like that. You can see the way lending's going. They're getting a little bit more flexible on things. And I think this is one of the areas that they can get flexible in. So those things, DSCRs, one-time construction, investor loans, bank statement loans, hard money. In 39 states, I can do hard money as well. Those are pretty good terms with really good LTVs. If you want to learn more, you can reach out. Interest-only loans, land loans, commercial, reverse mortgages, foreign national, renovation, I-10. We can do a lot of things.
Yeah,
for sure.
that's so fantastic. And I love this. So much to still capture, so much to still teach people about what the possibilities out there are. So
Yeah.
myself and Jeremy are actually going to create a series. So not like a long-standing podcast, but we're going to create a series about lending products and how to be a professional borrower and to teach you not to be a lending loser. So we want you to be a lending winner and all the things you have to prepare to do that. So I'm super excited to kind of be launching that with you, Jeremy. And really just, it'll be a playlist. We'll probably, break off 2 or 3. You might see us wearing the same clothes, but different topics because
We
we
shower.
want
We do shower.
for
Okay.
sure. For sure.
All right. We do
But we want
shower.
to educate you guys. There's so much misinformation, but there's so much potential. Like, I know we get excited. I know, trust you, me. Like 70% of my portfolio is sub 2. So I'm not saying this as somebody who doesn't love that strategy, but I will tell you that if you can make loans work for you, this is my perspective, you will sleep better at night knowing you don't have to worry about that DOS, that due on sale clause. So like my favorite is seller finance, straight seller finance, being able to get my own damn loan, and then from a sleeping perspective, like I don't worry. But that's just me. So anywho, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jeremy, for being here with us. So if people want to get a hold of you and need some of your advice, where should they reach out?
Wow, that's a great question. First of all, I'm excited to do all this with you. I'm looking forward to it. I think we're going to have a great time. Obviously, we can talk about this stuff for 8 hours on end. So I'm super stoked. Oh, thanks, Jen. There's Jen. We still have to connect.
Jen
We
is
still have to connect. All right. We've been messaging each other. Oh, we should connect. We should chat. Yeah, we should. We should. We're just, I can tell we're both busy. So JD Lender at JD Lender. And I did the don't be a StreamYard loser thing by not putting my handle where my name is. So, and also it looks like I'm in a cave. I'm broadcasting from a cave. I'll fix my lighting, Ingryd, I promise. They can reach me at JD Lender on all the socials, Jeremy Demers. Just Google my name. You'll see reviews. You'll see Facebook links. If you're in sub 2 or Gator, I'm in there. DM me. Let me know how I can help. You'll find my phone number everywhere too. So
fantastic.
thank you so much, Ingryd. I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Absolutely.
And our future collaboration. It's going to be super fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Or go check out fundmenationwide.com as well. It won't be direct connect to Jeremy. We'll filter, make sure that we can help and support you, but then we'll definitely send you out a Calendly link to connect and get on our calendar. So thank you, everybody out there. This has been the Explain It podcast coming to you every Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m. Arizona time, and bringing amazing experts like Jeremy. If you guys have questions or have any feedback about what kind of expert you'd like to see next, please let us know, and we will try to incorporate it into our calendar. But until next time, we will see you next week on the Explain It podcast. Thanks.